Hello, I'm Jim Carr, Training Director with the Florida RV Trade Association. We are pleased to present to you a 35-minute tutorial on the SMI supplemental braking system, Air Force One. Brent Schuck of SMI will be going through a live demonstration and installation, and we are here at the hitching post in Ocala, Florida.
Thanks, Jim. As Jim just said, we're here at the hitching post in Ocala, Florida. Right now we're going to discuss the installation of the Air Force One. Of course, we'll start by going through the contents of the packaged unit as you'll receive it. This is the box that you'll get. You'll see that it comes to you, and as you open it, you'll find these individual components within the box. Firstly, we have the operating unit. This is installed underneath the hood of the towed vehicle. The purpose of this box is to provide a reservoir for the air pressure in a case of a breakaway or emergency, so the activation of the unit can happen without connection to the coach. The other function is providing vacuum for the power brakes in the towed vehicle to give it an active pedal. This bag contains the parts for the coach installation, which would also include the L bracket for the connection at the back of the coach, and also the various T's and air fittings that are necessary for the air taps within the coach. This bag is what we call the coach notification bag. It consists of the connectors necessary to tap into the brake light switch, and also includes the LED light which will provide the coach notification. This bag contains the activation cylinder with the necessary installation components. This cylinder will attach on the brake arm of the towed vehicle and will apply the brake pedal proportionally to the braking of the coach. In this bag, we simply have the jumper which will connect the car and the the car and the coach together once the installation has been completed. Here we have a spool of 40 feet of 1/4-inch DOT airline. This airline will be used throughout the installation in the coach and the towed vehicle. This bag consists of all of the towed vehicle installation components, also including the L bracket for the front of the towed vehicle, the breakaway switch, which also mounts on the front of the vehicle, the various fuse holders and different connectors that will be necessary in the towed vehicle installation. This is the coach air connection assembly bracket. This is a very important part of the installation and is necessary for DOT compliance and a safe installation and operation in the coach. This is our own reserve air supply which we'll get from the air on board of the coach. This is volume air. The metered air will come into this relay valve. The purpose of this assembly is to provide metered air to the towed vehicle based on the coach's brake effort, but the actual physical air will come from our tank, which is a separate air supply. This, in the event of a breakaway, will allow the coach to still maintain its braking integrity while allowing the towed vehicle to operate proportionally. Of course, the installation instructions and then also the extra information packet are included. You'll notice that in the very beginning of the installation on page 3, the instructions, there's a parts kit breakdown which will discuss and label all the different parts I've discussed. Also a step-by-step guide including wiring diagram and plumbing diagram for the installation of the unit. So make sure you keep these handy throughout. Now we'll begin as we normally do with the installation in the towed vehicle. Here we are at the towed vehicle. We've popped the hood and now the engine compartment is exposed. Now this particular vehicle is a Pontiac Aztek. Every vehicle is going to be a little bit different under the hood, but we'll give you some general guidelines that will help you find an appropriate location for the operating unit. The first thing we look for, as I mentioned, is a location for the operating unit. We want to find a location that is free from any direct heat source, especially that of the exhaust manifold, as it's the hottest part. The other thing we want to avoid is any moving parts that could possibly come in contact with the box as the engine is operating. Once we've found a location, secure the box. Generally speaking, we'll use wire ties as the box is not heavy, or you can make a bracket or use self-tapping screws into different parts of the vehicle. As always, when drilling or modifying the vehicle, be exceptionally careful in making sure the area behind where you're drilling or modifying is clear from any components. Here we have the operating unit installed in the towed vehicle. You can see we've selected a location that is away from moving parts and any direct heat source. For this installation, we secured the box using the provided wire ties in the installation kit. In other vehicles, there are many places that the box can be put, but some of them may not be easily seen. A lot of vehicles in this area right here, there's a black shroud that will cover the front clip and the radiator section. When that's removed, there's frequently open places beneath where the box can be secured. Also, in other vehicles, there may be areas down behind the reservoirs or over here behind the batteries. Always make sure that you look beneath what's on top of the engine compartment if you're having trouble finding a location, because there may be a very open spot that's just not within view. As I mentioned, the location for the operating unit under the hood may not always be visible initially. As we see here in this Honda Odyssey minivan, the engine compartment is pretty full and packed in. Initially, it looks like there may be no location for the operating unit. That's when we need to look a little deeper and further into the vehicle. I can see down behind the grille that there's a pretty good amount of space, so what I'm going to do is remove this panel by taking a flat blade screwdriver, getting it underneath this clip and kind of prying it up a little bit, and then popping it out. Put these aside. Then I'm going to carefully pull up on this panel, making sure nothing is attached to it. No clips will break. I'll move this out of the way. Now you can see down here a little bit that there's quite a bit of room, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this grill similarly. Also being careful not to damage any of the plastic clips. Kind of carefully move this to the side. And we can see down here now, we have a lot of area where we can mount our operating box. Now when you're mounting it in this location, you want to be careful that you're not near any direct heat sources. This is far enough away from the radiator. And the other thing that's important is that you're not obstructing the normal airflow of the vehicle. As you can see, it's below any grill openings, which would prevent it from hindering the vehicle's cooling. Now that we've installed the operating unit, the next step is to install the breakaway switch and the L bracket on the front of the towed vehicle. Now to do so, you want to look at an area on the front that will of course give it enough room to mount securely and have easy access for connection and disconnection, but you also want to make sure it's not the lowest point on the vehicle. If the vehicle were to bottom out, you want to make sure that these two components are still going to be fine. We've secured them using the provided 1/4-20 bolts, lock nuts, and the flat washers. On the breakaway switch, when it's possible, we normally like to mount it so that it can swivel when not in tow. So when you're not towing, you can turn it to a 90-degree angle, which will of course make it not protruding. Then when you're ready to tow, you can grab it and pull it out straight. Also, what we've done is went ahead and attached the 2-wire pigtail for the coach notification light. We like to mount this here as it gives it a secure fixture to be on. Since we've used a locking nut, a nylon lock nut, on the breakaway switch, we don't have to worry about it loosening over time with the swiveling motion. Now we'll make the vacuum connection for the power brakes. The first thing we need to do is locate the rubber line between the brake booster and the intake manifold. Now the brake booster is easily located because it's behind your master cylinder. You can see the reservoir here for the brake fluid. Go back behind that and you'll find the rubber line. It runs directly from here, and you can see it runs over to the intake manifold. This is how the engine normally makes vacuum for the power assist of the towed vehicle. What we're going to do is put a T into this line that will allow us to make vacuum similarly as the engine does. It's typically easiest to, if you can with the rubber grommet, pull this fitting out. Sometimes it's a tight snug fit, but if you pull it out, you'll see that the rubber hose will come out, exposing itself, making it easier to work with. Now, one word of caution: if you're working with an older vehicle, a lot of time the rubber grommets become brittle, and if that's the case, pulling it may damage it, requiring a new grommet. So you can make the connection with it in, but often if it's a recessed booster, as this one is, it's easier to just pull it out. Now, this particular vehicle, as many GMs do, use what's called a 5/8 inch hose. Now, we work with a 3/8 inch hose, so this will show us how to install the adapters. Any vehicle using a 1/2 inch to a 5/8 inch hose will need to use the optional adapters, which are included in the kit. Now we're going to make the vacuum assembly. Since this is going to also include the adapters, which are these two pieces here in my hand, we're going to assemble it with this hose taking the end of the operating unit, the part that we would trim normally the excess of, and we're going to make the assembly outside the vehicle. You can also see here I have in my hand the T and the check valve. So what we'll do is we'll start by taking some lubricant. Spray silicone works the best. Give it a little spray on there, which will help it to slide right into the hose. We'll slide the T into the end until it touches the stop. Then we'll take our line cutters and we'll measure approximately how much we'll need so that the barbs here will touch here on the inside. So we can see we're going to need to cut about right here. Then we'll take our adapter. We'll hit that with a little silicone. And then we'll go ahead and put that into this part that's already on the T. Then we'll take the other end of the T, spray it, slide it in. We'll line up the check valve. And we'll cut. The side towards the T, as the brake booster is going to be on this side and the engine is going to be on this side, we'll want to put the opaque, kind of a whitish bone color towards the T. That way the black side will go towards the engine. So we'll go ahead and slide the T in. The T will often go in a lot easier than the other fittings, so you may not need to put silicone on that one. So then we'll take the other end of the check valve, which is exposed now. We'll plug that into the end of the line. We'll line up our adapter, make our cut. Again, spray it with a little silicone and then slide it in. So what you'll end up with is something that looks like this. You'll have the adapter to go to your OEM hose, your T, this will connect to the SMI Air Force One operating unit, your check valve with the black side towards the engine, and then the other adapter to get it to your OEM hose. Now we're going to take our completed assembly with the included hose clamps and we're going to put it into the towed vehicle. Now when installing this, you want to try to line it up with the hose, avoiding any sharp bends. Remember that these barred fittings are going to have to go in, so if you're at an angle, you don't want to try to wrap it around, it won't lay right. You want to try to get away from any angles or sharp bends that are already in the hose. So we'll line it up. Remember to mark on the other side of the barbs, and we'll take our line cutters, cut a straight edge, and then we'll cut the other side. On the 3/8 barbed connections we did earlier, you do not need to use hose clamps. However, when the adapters are going into the larger diameter hose, we do need to use the hose clamps on that connection. So we'll start by feeding on the hose clamp onto the line on the OEM line of the vehicle. We'll plug in our adapter. Again, you can use silicone on these to make it a little easier to slide in. Then we'll fish this underneath the spark plug wires here on this particular vehicle. Making sure not to create any kinks or stress on the line. Then we'll take the other end of the hose, which we trimmed here, that has the brake booster fitting on it. We'll feed our hose clamp onto that as well. We'll go ahead, slide that on to our fitting. And then we'll take our hose clamps, we'll tighten them down, and then it's just a matter of popping that back into the brake booster and connecting our SMI line into this leg of the T. We've now completed the vacuum connection, and you'll see here we've taken the hose from the box, we've routed it neatly, securing wire ties, and as always, avoiding any direct heat source and moving parts. We've attached it into the T, we've already assembled the connection back together in the towed vehicle, so now that portion is complete. Now what we'll do is look for a power source for the orange wire on the breakaway switch. Depending on where and how the switch is routed and also the location of the terminal selected for power, you may need to use a wire to extend the length of the orange wire to reach the fuse holder. We'll first start by trying to find the positive lead of the fuse terminal. On this box, it's located directly here. You can go to the positive lead on the battery, but you must use caution when doing so. If the battery is changed and the ring terminal for the power falls off, then your breakaway would be rendered inoperable. So if you change the battery or have somebody else change the battery, if you decide to go, always make sure that the ring terminal is still connected. By going to the fuse terminal, you avoid that altogether. So we'll flip up this and we'll see we found the stud for the power. Now our fuse holder, when you get it out of the box, it looks like this. It's a loop, and within this cap you'll see where the fuse plugs in. What you'll do is you'll take some cutters and you'll cut that loop. You'll take some strippers, strip a length of wire for our connector. On one side, you'll put a ring terminal for the power wire. So we'll put that on here. Take our crimpers and we'll crimp it securely. On some vehicles, you'll find that the stud is slightly larger than the ring terminal. In those cases, you can clip a notch out of the terminal and kind of use your pliers to spread it a little bit wider. That will allow it to plug onto the terminal. So we'll take our ratchet and we'll loosen this. We'll plug our modified ring terminal in underneath. May need to go, there we go. Make sure it's in there nice and good, tight. Then we'll tighten it back down, keeping it lined up with the direction we want it to end up in. Once you secured that, you can flip the cap back down. Take your other side, strip the wire. And on this side, we'll put one of the blue butt connectors included in the kit. Then we'll connect either the extension or the orange wire, if it will reach, into this portion. Now it's important when you're installing the fuse holder and dealing with any sort of a bare or stripped wire when it's attached to a direct power source to always leave the fuse out of the connector. If you leave the fuse in, if this were to touch a ground, the engine, or any sort of a ground stud, it would spark and would burn the fuse. Now we'll work within the towed vehicle. The first step some vehicles have, as this one does, you see here, what's called a hush panel. That's a trim panel, such as this one here, that's underneath the dash above the brake pedal. Now in order for us to get to an access to go through the firewall, we'll need to remove this to work more easily. Many vehicles use screws or the snap tabs to hold in the hush panel. This particular one uses spring clips. So to remove it, just kind of reach up under here and give a little force and you'll feel the spring clips will release. Now we have the hush panel out and you can see what was holding it in are these metal spring clips. These grip tightly in the vehicle, so you may need to use a pretty good amount of force to pull. Just be careful that nothing is in the way so that you won't pull any wires out or accidentally cut your finger when you're pulling with force. Now that we've removed the hush panel, we need to find a place in the firewall where we can pass the air hose and also the wire for the notification light. It doesn't need to be a large opening, so many times we can use existing grommets or punch-outs in the firewall. As we can see here, the main wiring harness grommet already has some aftermarket wires such as the tow wiring through it. In this case, we'll use this opening. If you're using the main wiring harness grommet, take a box knife or other knife, utility knife, to cut a slit where you can poke the wire and the hose through. Use extra caution if you're in the wiring harness grommet so that you don't accidentally nick or scratch any of the wires in the harness. Now we've run the hose and the wire through the firewall. We're going to locate the brake light switch of the towed vehicle. To do so, follow the brake pedal you see here. Go up the arm and you'll see that there's a switch on the top that has many wires in it. The wire that we want is what's called the cold side of the brake light switch. This wire is normally cold, but has power on it when the pedal is depressed. The easiest way to test for this is to take a poke tester such as this that will illuminate a light when there's power on the wire. We've done so and selected the wire. To test, use the process of elimination on the wires. When you selected the right wire, when you push the pedal, you'll see that the test light illuminates. When the pedal's off, the light's off. This is the wire that we want. Now that we've found the appropriate wire, we'll prepare our black wire for the connection using the terminals provided in the coach notification bag. First, we'll start by stripping the wire that we've run through the firewall. We'll put on our male spade connector and crimp it. Then we'll put over our red flip over connector. With this connector, you'll fold it slightly, exposing the female slot. Plug in the male terminal onto it, and you'll end up with this. Now what you'll do with this connector is you'll wrap this V over the wire that you want to crimp on, close the case, and you'll take a pair of pliers or channel locks and crimp it onto the wire, splicing it. Now that we've attached the black wire to the cold side of the brake light switch, we've gone ahead and installed the cylinder. As you can see, the cylinder clamps onto the brake arm, and the body may be mounted on either side of the brake arm. The cable needs to have a pretty straight shot to the firewall coming out of the cylinder. Normally speaking, the bracket that's included for the tie down will be screwed down using the self-tapping screw provided. In this case, it was more convenient to use one of the studs on the brake booster. So we've used that for our clamp here. So you can see right here, we've mounted our clamp on the firewall and our cable goes to the clamp and tightens down. Now the amount of slack you want with the cable is about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. And to determine that, you'll move it all the way to the left and all the way to the right. And that distance should be 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch. Here we have the cylinder on the brake arm of the Honda Odyssey. We can see here that on this application, the clamp mounts to the firewall using the provided self-tapping screw. Before we mount it to the firewall, you want to cut this square away from the rubber insulation removing any foam that may be behind it, and going back behind the firewall on the engine side, verify that that location is safe to drill. Once you've secured the clamp in the cylinder, attach the cable through and tighten down the clamp so that it's tight. Also, make sure that you double loop the cable before you tighten it down completely. Now that we've finished the inside of the car, we're going to wrap things up under the hood. Firstly, we're going to connect our ground to the white wire on the system. Now, the way we've run the wire here to save some time is we've run the white wire down to the front of the car for the notification light connection. So up here, to make our actual ground connection, we're going to take the provided Scotch lock, we're going to flip it over the white wire on the operating system. We're going to take the provided 5-foot length of white wire and we're going to slide it into the other end of our connection. We're going to take a pair of standard pliers, making sure that we hold the wire in place while we crimp down the blade. You'll feel it snap in. It should be flush on the top when it's made a good connection. Once it's made a good connection, you can easily flip over the case and it should snap right into place. Give it a good tug to make sure that everything took. Then, as with all your electrical connections under the hood, to make sure you maintain longevity, use a high quality electrical tape to wrap the connection. For the ground connection, the preferable location is going to be any one of the ground studs or frame grounds that are located on the vehicle. If you can't find any near where you need to make the connection, you can use a self-tapping screw in the provided eyelet to make your own ground into a metal surface of the vehicle. Be sure to test it that it is a good ground with a continuity tester if you do choose to make your own ground. And also, of course, be careful not to accidentally damage any of the components of the vehicle when you're drilling. So I've located a ground connection here, so I'm going to cut my wire and then I'm going to strip it, taking one of the provided ring terminals. I'm going to crimp it onto the wire, and then I'm going to remove the ground and then place this terminal back in place with the ground. We've made the ground connection. Now what we're going to do is connect our air lines into the operating unit. Now during the break, we already ran a wire, or a hose rather, air line down to the L bracket on the front of the vehicle and connected it. When connecting these lines, you want to make sure to avoid any sharp angles that could cause kinks. If we go directly here, you can see that this is a pretty tight bend that may cause this line to kink in the future, especially when it's exposed to the engine's heat. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop it around and we're going to give it a little bit easier of an angle. To cut the air line, I recommend a razor blade or some sort of a razor blade based cutter. Using standard side cutters could cause a pinch and a burr, which may cause it not to seat properly. When cutting, you want to make sure you get as close to a straight angle as possible. Any other exaggerated angles could cause it to leak when it's in the connector. To connect the air line in, once you've trimmed it to length, line it up and push. You'll feel it click twice. Once it's clicked in, it gives you a firm, positive grip. To release the fitting, if you need to, push on the ring, kind of push lightly in on the hose and then pull it back out. It'll release it just fine. So we'll push that one in. We'll go on ahead and connect our line, which we've already run through the firewall, which is connected to the cylinder on the brake arm. In a similar fashion, we'll kind of line it up. We'll trim it. And we'll push it in. Now the black wire that we ran out from the brake switch also goes down to the front of the towed vehicle and connects to the two-way plug we already attached to the side of the breakaway switch. The black wire is going to go to the red wire on the switch, and the brown wire down on the switch goes to the ground wire, which we ran down earlier mentioned. The final step in the towed vehicle is to insert the 15 amp fuse included in the kit into the fuse holder we mounted here earlier. Match the spades up with the two connectors in the fuse terminal and push firmly. You'll feel it seat in. Then flip over the weatherproof cap and tuck the fuse out of the way. Now we've completed the installation in the towed vehicle. We'll move over to the coach and work on that now. We've just wrapped up the towed vehicle and now we're here at the coach. Now on the towed, a typical installation for an experienced technician is about 2 hours. You may expect to do a little bit more than that if you're familiarizing with yourself for the first time. On the coach, as with any part of the installation, safety is the key factor. Now here on the coach, we've opted to use some of these ramps to pull up the coach. If you have hydraulic jacks for leveling, you can use that to kind of lift up the coach. But before you start any part of the installation, make sure your airbags are down, making sure the coach is as far down as it can be. On an air-leveled coach, you may need to get some blocks for the chassis, or you may want to get some of these ramps like this, or maybe a service bay would have a lift that you could use. Remember when you're under the coach to always think safety. Now that we've safely lifted the coach, we're going to roll underneath and take a look at the airlines. Generally speaking, the airlines we deal with are going to be in front of the differential, up in this area here. We're going to get a service line for volume air, we're going to get metered line for a proportional input, and then we're going to mount the tank in this area. When mounting the tank, there are some special concerns that we'll talk about a little later. This is in front of the differential on a Freightliner chassis. Every chassis is going to vary a little bit, but they're all basically the same in this part. The lines we're going to be dealing with are the input for the main brake relay, which is this line here. This is volume air from your tank. And the other line we're going to be dealing with is for metered air, which is this line. This is the line you'll want to tap into. It goes from the bottom of the service brake relay and it goes into the top of the spring brake valve. The line may vary in color, but it always goes to the top of the brake, the spring brake valve. Some coaches mount the spring brake valve in a remote location. Monacos mount it behind the differential in many applications. No matter where it is or what color of the line, it's always the line on the very top of the spring brake valve. Before you cut the green service line hose, it's important to drain the braking air tank. Normally that's the front tank in the motorhome. To do so, you'll pull the lanyard on the drain plug in a safe manner. When mounting the tank, it's often easiest to try to find existing bolts to use rather than drilling your own holes. Here we found a mounting bracket for the spring brake valve that has 2 bolts which are sufficient for the installation of the tank. If you do need to drill your own holes, remember to be careful and check behind the area you're drilling so that there's no obstructions. Also, a note, different parts of the coach are suspended by the air suspension. The top part often moves up and down with the suspension while the bottom is held up by the wheels. Keep this in mind as you're mounting your tank, that different parts may move with the suspension. Here we have our modified tank bracket installed. You can see that we use the provided bolts, drilling out the existing holes for more stability. We went ahead and plumbed the hosing as well. The bottom line at the bottom of the relay valve goes to the back of the coach, and the metered line is on top of the relay valve. Then the supply air goes into the side of the tank through the pressure protection valve. And here we have the T's. We made earlier the lines cut. We went ahead and put the T's in place and ran the lines to the appropriate locations on the air connection assembly. Once you've run the air line to the back of the coach, you can install the air bracket. The air bracket here mounts on the back of the coach, and it needs to be up high so that it's not the lowest point, so that if something were to happen in the back of the coach were to bottom out, it would still be safe. The air cap this cap also comes with the L bracket. It can be inserted on here when it's not being used. The air line for the metered air that runs to the back plugs into the back of the L bracket on that fitting. On the coach, we've also installed the LED monitor light. You can see here on the blue ox tow, we've mounted it to the side so that when it's in tow, it'll face towards the backup camera. The plug simply attaches to the corresponding plug on the breakaway switch we mounted earlier in the towed installation. Once you finish the installation and have aired the coach back up, it's important to use a garden sprayer with soapy water to spray down the fittings and verify that there are no leaks. If any leaks should be found, they need to be remedied quickly. In testing the unit, you want to make sure that the coach is aired up, the vehicles are connected. As you apply the pedal proportionally harder in the coach, you'll see that the pedal in the towed moves proportionally further. If you're using an external air source to power the system as the coach is not available, be sure that you do not exceed 90 to 100 psi in your testing. Now we've completed the coach and the entire Air Force One installation. The system is now ready to be tested and ready for use for many years of trouble-free, maintenance-free towing. The installation on the coach should take about an hour to an hour and a half for an experienced tech, making it the installation about 3 to 3.5 hours total. If you should have any questions during the installation, feel free to call the 800 number, 800-893-3763. And we'd be more than happy to help you with any questions or problems you may be experiencing. Again, thank you for purchasing Air Force One.